This podcast is a project of the Climate Designers Network.
This podcast was supported in part by grant funding from the U.S. Department of Education's Title IX grant program through the University of Illinois Center for Global Studies. The content of this program does not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Hey, this is Eric. Welcome to Season 4 of Climify, where this season we want to help change the system. In this first series of 4 episodes, we're talking to people who are disrupting the status quo in their daily lives. The show format is a tad different this season. Each episode is broken into 3 segments. To begin, I'll be joined by one of our researchers on Climify to break down what we both heard in my interview with our guest and what you should listen for. Our second segment is, of course, our interview, which is always still hopeful with plenty of inspiration. And finally, our third segment breaks down what we heard as calls for action in the interview itself and what you can do to change the system through climate action. I'm happy to introduce Bhavna Bhavani Shankar. Bhavna is an experienced researcher and design strategist. They focus on innovating in the space of learning and how those experiences can be optimized and made better. Bhavna has a BSc in Visual Communication and Photography from the University of Madras, an MDes in Experience Design at the National Institute of Fashion Technology in India, and a Master's of Fine Art from the Savannah College of Art and Design. Bhavna, this is the first episode of Climify that you are starring on, introducing Haleemah, and please, no spoilers. You promise no spoilers for this interview, only high-level stuff, right?
I will try my best.
You'll try your best. Well, this opening segment that we're doing is just to help everyone learn more, be more inspired from our guest. Bhavna and I have spent some time listening and re-listening to Haleemah, and we have a few things that we thought you should pay attention to when you listen to the episode.
Haleemah Sadiah is a senior designer at Catapult Design, and she's gotten her MFA in Design for Sustainability from the Savannah College of Art and Design. And most recently, she's been nominated as one of the honorees for the Green Biz 30 Under 30.
Bhavna, what were some of the main things that you think stood out to you as important things that Haleemah said?
She spoke a lot about the importance of small changes in larger systems. And I think that as a designer, as somebody who's had a similar journey in my education, at least, I do find a lot of lessons with what she said. You need to know what the larger system is, and you need to know how a small change can impact the larger system. And I think a couple of other things that she said too. I think she spoke a lot about indigenizing design, and that's going to be really interesting. And I do think that people should really look out for that when she talks about it. And probably one other thing was the value of generational knowledge.
Agreed.
Really trying not to go in detail, but okay.
Yeah, no, you promise no spoilers in this. We can't spoil this, but generational knowledge, I'm 100% on board with that. Just that point you made about small changes, I think that's an important thing that Haleemah covers, because I think a lot of people believe that small changes don't mean anything, right? Like what I didn't recycle that cup. That's a bad example, but like these little tiny things that we do on a daily basis. Her argument, I think, is pretty great that they do mean a lot. And that another point you made about visualizing the system, I think that's where people who are very creative, like designers, can be very helpful in being agents of change, because they can help visualize the problem.
Exactly. Extremely important. I think if you don't have a clear picture of what your outcome is likely to look like, it's very difficult to even convince somebody that this is a solution you have that's going to fix a problem when you can't see where the impact actually is going to be.
Yeah, you got to be able to see it first. I think Haleemah too is another great example, and you'll hear this in that we had a lot of trouble this season, like trying to fit people into boxes, right? Like we have 3 series of lifestyle, commercial, and policy And Haleemah does a lot of things in her life, which is why she's here in this series. But I mean, it also happens on her job, and she talks about that. And it's just another great example of how you can't put people in a box.
You could fit into any of the series, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
The
She's great.
projects are so diverse.
Yeah. I mean, no wonder she's 30 under 30. I feel like I'm not going to give away how old I am now, but I mean, thinking back to when I was in my 20s, geez, I was far from a 30 under 30. So she's definitely someone who I look up to for that.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. We're happy to have her here. And without further ado, well, Haleemah, welcome to Climify. And thank you for agreeing to be on the program. I am happy that we found today to have a conversation.
Thank you, Eric. I'm so glad to be here. I'm really excited to talk through changing the system with you.
Yes, I hope we do change the system today, or at least learn how, right? So I'm going to ask you, given your professional and personal experiences, what does the system mean to you, and how do you define changing the system? Big question.
Yeah, it's starting off with a big one.
We're going to drop it right off the beginning. Big, hard question.
The system for me is a set of elements that are connected or interconnected through flows or patterns of behaviors that kind of form a bigger whole, which is geared towards attaining some sort of goal. That's kind of how I tend to define or frame what a system is through what it does. So you hear me say the craft system of India, or like the education system, the healthcare system, which can mean many things in many different levels, but it's usually stopping at what it does and the sort of elements that come together to form it.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because it's just this interconnected weaving of people, objects, and what else? Like experiences too.
And then like how they work together, right? Because when you're thinking of interactions and behaviors, it's how do people kind of speak to each other, to work with each other, and then the role of time kind of influences how these things work. And that's something that I'm very conscious about, or learning to be conscious about in my work, because this is more into the changing the system part of your question, which is it takes a long time for systems change to occur because you're looking at so many different elements, which are interacting in many different ways.
Well, I can imagine, right? Like changing the system based on your definition, you may, if you're not looking at the bulk of a system and how things are connected and work together, you may think you're changing something, but it's not changing it over there. Like you have that big picture, right?
Yeah, and then it takes even a small change tends to have a ripple effect across the system. So, but to see that can take a really, really long time. I recently actually heard someone say that it takes about 15 years.
15 years?
Define a change has happened in a system. I should look that up for you, but it takes a really, really long time.
It takes a long time. Yeah, well, I hope we can change the system faster than that timeline, considering the spot we're in.
And so we can set things into motion now, right? So changing the system, I think when you think about actively setting out to changing the system, to me that looks like challenging the status quo and redefining the interactions amongst those different elements in ways that acknowledge those that have been historically marginalized, and giving or creating that space for everyone to determine what a future, like a new world, can look like, and redefine that space where they are within the system for themselves. So there's like a lot of seeds that you can essentially plant.
Planting seeds. And I've heard this before from other guests on the show about one way to change the system is to challenge the status quo. And I think that's an easy entry for some, right? Easier entry as opposed to something major, but just standing up for what you believe in, or something that, like you said, is challenging the powers that be to help people in a community, specifically marginalized community.
Yeah, and it definitely sounds very simple, but it's extremely difficult in practice.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And that impact is something that you've been making in the world. And I'm curious to know about what your first experience was with impact, and when did you realize that you can change things, and how did you measure that impact?
I first came across the term almost, I want to say 6 to 7 years ago in
Mhm.
Professor Scott Boylston's class in Savannah College of Arts and Design, where I got
Scott
my
Boylston,
master's. Yeah.
a guest on this
Uh,
season of Climify.
oh, great. Yeah, I've been a student for, I think, 6 years now, 7 years.
7 years?
Every time
Wow.
he says something, I'm just like, wow, I did not know that. So there's lots of learning. Very excited for your episode. But I came to Scouts pretty much to understand how I can create a positive impact as a product designer. My undergraduate degree was in accessory design. And I'd done a lot of work with artisans in India before this in the product design space. And I always was very keenly aware of my role as a designer, not aware of my impact in the system.
Mhm.
So I knew that I was playing like a negative role in the system, but I didn't really know how I could play a positive role. But I also understood at the same time that design has this capacity for imagination and creativity and changing the way that we exist. Like we pretty much define design thinking as a problem solving methodology. So that's kind of how I found myself at SCAD. And there we have this thing called the Sustainable Practices Lab, where Scott pretty much introduces us to nonprofit organization. I worked with Haleemah House, which is a nonprofit focused on environmental justice. And we worked with the Neoport community of Hudson Hill and Savannah. And our task was to create this social impact tour that would address the community's long-standing environmental justice issues with the board and the industries. It was a 10-week project, but building community trust was really hard because they had already been victim of like tokenism, and there was a lot of fatigue in interacting with designers and other people from outside the system. So anyway, took us a while, but that project helped me realize the importance of working as a designer, or the importance of design in these kinds of spaces, right? So it led to the development or the creation of a multi-stakeholder experience called Table Talk,
Table talk?
which that's what we named the project. So the idea was that we would bring these different stakeholders from business and government and put them in the shoes of frontline communities through a role-playing experience. And that kind of helps them understand or confront the decisions that they make in their day-to-day and how that impacts communities. So the idea behind this whole project was that they would participate in an empathetic thinking practice, which, if you're familiar with Richard Buchanan and his concept
Richard
of
Buchanan,
placement,
yeah.
yes. So he suggests that by changing the different viewing angles of like elements in a system, you can kind of circumvent bounded rationality and help people see outside of where they are. And once you get that bigger picture of the system, you have a better idea of how to change it. So all of those things, like working on that really big project with actual communities, my design served as like this really powerful tool to bring different stakeholders to the table and help them see kind of outside of themselves, was a very powerful experience for me as a student, you know? It was like, wow, we're here, we're not just like creating change or making change happen, but we're kind of supporting people to see something that's bigger than them and
Mhm.
be a part of that something that's bigger than them.
Well, after school, you decided to keep on that path and pursue sustainability and social impact. Can you talk about that journey?
So I was working in social impact throughout school. And then right then, I was introduced to Caterpillar Design, which is a nonprofit social impact consultancy that I'm currently working at now. Been here for about 3 years, and they had a fellowship opening. And so I joined as a fellow right after graduating from sustainability at GAD. And I've been here for about 3 years, and we've done all sorts of projects, gosh, like in healthcare, education, redefining human-centered design, to run indigenous loans. Now I'm working again in like healthcare internationally. So it's given me like this wide range of social impact
Hmm.
experience.
How do you
Been pretty
measure
cool.
or ensure that what you're doing at Catapult does create impact?
Right. So we're a design consultancy. So we don't get to engage with the work over a longer period of time, but we've tend to measure impact project by project. It changes depending on who we're working with and what we're working on. So sometimes we're very far removed from when impact will occur. Like for instance, we're designing products, very, very high level concepts for products that will not enter the market in about 10 years, but we're doing it with women in different countries, actually. So the value that our work kind of brings to that space is engaging with women in these spaces, or for this podcast, I want to say system, and bringing their voices to the table in design for products that they will use, which has historically never really happened in
Yeah.
healthcare. But then projects closer to home, like for the indigenizing design project that I previously referenced, it's a little bit easier to see impact because we're working with partners who are implementing these processes. And we've continued like a very sustained long-term
Yeah.
engagement, and we've won like continuous grants with them. So we've gotten to test the curriculum with students, and soon we receive like partner and student testimonials. Sometimes you will also see with projects where participants will change the way that they work.
Hmm.
We've had a participant change schedules after participating in a design workshop simply because she was so inspired by what we were doing, and like the potential of her participating as an expert in changing the system that she went into public policy afterwards.
So she changed her career because of you.
Yeah. I mean,
Way to go.
me is a strong term, but
Yeah.
it's
Changing the system there. Good job.
yeah, just participating in the design process, I think, enables people to see them play a more active role in what that can look like,
Mhm.
just because we are kind of imagining, right? And collective imagining can be a very powerful tool for action.
Yeah, it sounds like this is the perfect job for you, considering what you were doing in school. And this is just like a big extension of that, right?
And you watch, I feel like I'm in school every year.
Well, so you're at Catapult, and how does social design work? And what are its key defining pillars? What's the design process like where you are at Catapult?
We mainly follow like a human-centered design process, engaging very deeply with communities for experts to their lived experiences. So our solutions are very innovative, but they're also very rooted in the grassroots.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we hold our processes very lightly. So again, this changes from project to project depending on who our partners are. We have a very locally led model, I would say. And throughout all of my projects, I've kind of like pushed that boundary of what it means to be a designer as a facilitator and what that role can look like in a peer research or peer-to-peer action model. So we've had instances where our participants were also facilitators. So they facilitated their own workshops, they did the synthesis, they also facilitate ideation. They're part of creating the final deliverable. And then there are projects where we work with our partners in like the kind of design expert capacity, and they provide the local expertise. So I'd say it's very design as facilitation led more than design as expert led.
So do you find that you're doing more from a facilitation standpoint than actually making something physical or digital in the end?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's important.
A lot of the work is kind of facilitating participants and then like bringing those stories together. In one of our projects, actually, I think we defined design as a mirror that kind of helps people in the system see the bigger picture and understand how to like change.
Yeah, you can visualize things, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's kind of like the primary skill set, I think, in system thinking.
Yeah,
being able to visualize and communicate that system or like how those interactions kind of play over time.
Well, I think that's where design can play a really big role in any sort of social impact, including climate action, right? And climate justice in particular, because it can help visualize where we are in that system, where there are opportunities, and where the problems are.
Yeah. Also, really, really like systemization towards for not just for communication, but also for like ideation and modeling. I think we very often tend to not use mapping as a tool for understanding the impact of or the unintended impact, usually is what it is, of our designs on the system. So see, there are multiple ways to use it. And I think that's kind of like the key skill set along with facilitation that I use the most.
We'll be back after this message.
What do design students think about their education when it comes to sustainability and climate change? Are they satisfied with their studies and ready to apply their skills to the real world? Or are they longing to learn design frameworks, tools, and approaches more relevant to our ever-changing environment? My name is Zoe Eddington, researcher on the New Wave team at Climate Designers. Since 2021, the New Wave team has been asking these questions and interviewing various design students to get answers. In our previous reports, we analyzed student survey responses and summarized the key takeaways for design educators interested in their students' feedback. In our current report, we expanded our research to learn even more about the mindsets of design students by gaining responses from students from around the world and students from non-degree programs. We also included specific next steps for design educators. University instructor and New Wave information designer Stevie Bales provides specific resources as a starting point for updating course curricula to involve more climate education. Curious to learn more? Head to climatedesigners.org/edu/newwave to download our latest issue. Get in touch with us if you have any questions about our report or if you're interested in learning how you can bring climate-related content into your classroom.
Well, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but you're a recent 30 under 30 honoree from Green Biz, rising star fighting climate change at work. How did it feel when you did they call you, email you? What did it?
It was an email.
Email?
Or just push an email.
Did you apply for this, or did they find you? How did this all work?
I was nominated.
Someone nominated you. Yeah. You know who? No. You have a secret fan out there that is.
No. Yeah. But I think it was a huge shock, honestly. I was very surprised, yeah. And very flattered. So it was amazing. Yeah. Very lucky.
Yeah, I'm sure you're not in this for winning awards, but it must felt awesome to be honored.
Yeah.
Well, how have your experiences then, where you work at Catapult Design, across different projects and in this different industries helped you connect and mitigate climate action for different communities?
Right. So we know marginalized communities are already the most heavily impacted by the climate crisis, right?
Yeah.
And by including their voices in reimagining a just and equitable future, we are making a difference. I think that's what we think of as our contribution to this. We designing existing systems with kind of like the longer term in mind to see how design can be used as a tool to facilitate equity so that all involved and affected can weigh in and like build their new system in a way that works for them, that is sustainable, it's rooted in place, it's resilient. I think that for me is how we kind of respond to the climate crisis by reimagining what a future, sustainable future can look like. It's a little bit like shifting the way that humanity functions so that we can do better, be better, show up in ways that center the people who are most impacted by these crises, to kind of take control of the system and say this is what they want and this is what can be. Because a lot of the times when things are socially equitable and environmentally beneficial, they're also economically beneficial. So then other stakeholders will follow that change.
Yeah.
And that's how you create like lasting, meaningful change.
Yeah, when you keep those actions in the community and that they continue those actions on and on, I think that's vital, right? But they need help, right? It's a community effort. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I want to go back to when you were a student at SCAD and you worked in, I don't know what this is, so you're going to have to explain this to me. Craft clusters. You worked on craft clusters in India. What was that project all about, and what did you learn from it?
So I already mentioned a little bit that it was my work with craft clusters that kind of brought me to SCAD, right? So in India, we have like these geographical locations that we called craft clusters, in which the entire village or the entire locality practices the same craft. If you visit one of these, you'll find like every house will have, if it's a pottery cluster, every house will have like a pottery wheel. You'll see like lots of pots outside everybody's houses. Everyone's mom, grandmom, dad, granddad, everyone, like little kids, everyone is participating in the craft, right? And that bond that they have as like a social unit is kind of dominated by the craft. That's their like main source of livelihood. It's how they define like community. It's how they, if a tool breaks or whatever, they're like going to the neighbor's house and borrowing tools. They're learning from each other. There's brands will tend to work with like entire clusters or parts of clusters. So they're sharing their, I want to say, middlemen, pretty much what it is, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what a craft cluster is. I find that extremely interesting because it has like this element of generational transfer. It has an element of culture. It has an element of craft and art. And as a designer in that space, I was very enamored by it. So a lot of people are. It's a very interesting model.
Yeah. What craft did you see the most?
Oh, before I graduated, before I did my MFA thesis, which is not what we're going to be talking about, I did a lot of crocheting.
Crochet.
And crochet and a lot of, there's a craft cluster called Channapatna, close to where I grew up in Bangalore. And they do a lot of woodworking.
Woodworking.
Like on the lake. So it's circular wood and they make toys. That's what they're looking for. It's like a toy cluster. So
that sounds like the one I want to be in. Toys, making toys. Yeah.
Making toys, very nice, bright colors. They use local wood, they use local colors. So it's all very likely rooted in there.
Mm-hmm.
And before colonization, artisans, but also designers of their product. And those products are made for like the local regions, so to speak. But with industrialization, colonization, all of these other things that happen, the role of the artisan changed, and they went
Yeah.
from being designers and producers to just producers. And then you had like people like me, essentially, like going into these systems and being like, this is the spec, and now you make the product. And they were reduced to being machines and not
Yeah.
people who kind of like inherited craft, right? So my thesis is focused on that relationship between the artisan and the person who buys the craft from them, the craft product from them, which is usually larger brands. I worked Jeffrey Rugs, worked with Jeffrey Rugs, which is a handcrafted rugs brand in Jaipur. They work across 6 states with around 40,000. It was around 40,000 artisans at the time. And that's a huge range of people. And across many, I think it was 600-ish craft clusters. And every craft cluster kind of like has their own specialization. So the number of knots that they use or the kind of weaving that they do is different. But the goal was to understand how we can build cultural competence between the organization and the capabilities of the craft clusters to self-organize through the lens of human capabilities was very, very, very influenced by development theories, I guess, and Python as well, and kind of like brought that to the capability. Brought that to the cultural competence of organizations that work with artisans, and resulted in like an organizational development toolkit and also like a design thinking education system. Because one of the things that I realized was that artisans were having trouble communicating their design knowledge to designers, and designers were having trouble communicating what they were thinking to artisans. So there was like that disconnect. And when there is a disconnect, people in power generally tend to adopt a top-down method of working, right? So conditions that kind of encourage equity can be threatening to people who are in positions of power because they feel like it's being taken away from them. So the goal was to help people understand how they both work so that they can find better ways of working with each other and not at each other. And it's difficult for many reasons because one, there's like a language barrier. There is the rural-urban divide. There's an education barrier. There's a cultural divide. There's a bunch of things that happen. But I think that the work happened over a period of 2 years, and it resulted in quite a few interventions. And the organization that I was working with was already doing a lot of work. So they had artisans that were building their own designs for their rugs, and they were open to the idea of change. So we did planted some seeds. That's what it happened.
Yeah, planted some seeds. Well, one thing that hit me when you were describing the craft clusters was that it's a system, right? It's a system of what you call generational knowledge to some degree. And you mentioned capitalism and colonization, right? Two huge systems collided and really changed the system of that community, of that culture. And I don't know that that's the kind of system change we want. We want the changing back to what that culture was responding to and doing and enjoying. So I don't know. It was a big moment for me in what you were describing. And I'm wondering how you felt describing that.
When the system that we just spoke about, I think is victim to what we tend to call wicked problems.
Yeah.
And so there are many, many, many different ways to look at it, and many, many, many different solutions that will just create more problems, right? For me, the designer in me was very excited at the thought of working on a project or a problem like this, because I think that there is a lot that we can do.
Yeah.
But the human in me is extremely worried, I want to say.
Realism crashes into the optimistic designer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're like, how do you change it? We can't go back to how things were 500 years ago or so.
Yeah.
But how do we go forward from here? And how do we make sure that we're taking everyone with us in this change? I think it's kind of the challenge. And in order for us to do that, we need to have everyone at the table.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned generational knowledge. Can you talk more about what that means and why it's important?
So I was very lucky enough to work on a project with Dazzle Design where we won the 2021 design grant.
Congratulations.
From the Endowment of the Arts, National Endowment of the Arts. And we got to work with Indigenous communities in Phoenix on redefining the design process or building and indigenizing curriculum.
Mhm.
So one of the things that came up a lot in that, and that's where I learned the term and where I've begun to see it everywhere, it seems, is generational knowledge. It's one of the key markers of the indigenizing process. And it's important because it sees things both forwards and backwards. You're thinking about how things are getting passed down to you from the people who came before you. And then you're also very actively thinking about how you're passing things down. And they don't have to stay the same, right? Like with every person that this transfer happens, there's a change because you bring yourself to the process and you update it or refine it or change it depending on the needs of your system in that moment in time. So generational knowledge forms one of the six indigenizing markers. The others are community-led decision-making, reclamation, and revitalization, which is recognizing the land and also reclaiming your space and revitalizing the indigenous perspectives and values. And also recognizing your own cultural and individual identity. And the last one is relationship building. When you put them all together, you kind of create the indigenizing process. And this model is for Indigenous people who want to kind of practice design, but it's also for non-Indigenous people who want to work respectfully with Indigenous communities. And encourage everyone to kind of like take a look at it because it's not as simple as I just described it. These markers are also generational in the sense that they serve as indicators for when or if indigenizing has happened. But they also serve as like goals for us to kind of build towards. And it's important to think of one in generation to the other. So generational knowledge is knowledge that is being passed down from generation to generation. So you're kind of inheriting that in your learning and then you're passing it down. But you can't really do it without acknowledging your own cultural identity or what you bring to that knowledge. And then also you can't really do it without relationship building. You can, connecting with people around you. So they're all interconnected ways of doing that Indigenous people have practiced for centuries. But they help us be a little bit more aware of how we include everyone at the table.
Well, I have that PDF that you're referring to. Before we met, I can't remember when, a couple months ago, I think that's when I stumbled across Catapult. And that particular project at Catapult really interested me. So that was a PDF I downloaded right away. So thank you for working on that because I think it is super important.
Thank you. Yeah. We were able to secure a second grant from the Bharatiya Foundation and work with students at Codify and test it out with Indigenous students.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we've received really good feedback on the curriculum. And we also received a new NEA grant for 2024, 2025. So we're starting like a whole new round of testing it out.
Well, you've worked on some awesome projects in school and then now at Catapult. if you could, which industry community would you most like to work with to help address problems that they are currently facing? Like it's your dream project.
An industry I haven't had the chance to work in yet, but I like kind of tested the waters a little bit is food, local food systems.
Local food, okay.
And that is something that I'm really, really passionate about. Just because of, everything we just spoke about. But I think by now that I'm really passionate about systems mapping and bringing all of those different elements of the system together. And I think that there's such a huge opportunity for us to do that in our food systems and spaces. So yeah, something where you bring different stakeholders together and create access to through community-driven organizations, I think would be pretty cool.
Yeah, well, I'm a big nerd when it comes to connecting systems and visualizing systems myself. So I appreciate that from you. So you're doing a lot of really good work and making positive impact where you are. Do you have any advice for anyone who wants to make an impact, change the system, fight climate change, but don't have maybe the policies or resources in place to support them?
Yeah, I think I would encourage people to find out what their system needs, to understand where you are in the system, what your own positionality is, but then also kind of figure out what the needs of your system are and who needs to make those changes happen. Identifying like the right person is key, and then also understanding their positionality in the system. So once you have an idea of like who the storyteller is, who the audience is, what the story is that needs to be told, I think kind of helps you create that vision and communicate that narrative. There is a quote by bell hooks that I really, really like, and I've been
bell
very
hooks.
inspired
I love
by.
bell hooks.
Right?
Yeah.
The function of art is to do more than tell it like it is, but to imagine what's possible. So I think as designers, that's kind of the secret. So show what is, but also show it in a way that empowers people to make or create action.
That it's possible, right? And we're good at that from a design perspective and visualization, right? Being able to show what could be. And this has been a theme, I think, not only in this season, but in other seasons of the show. And that is visualizing the future that you want. And that's very powerful, not only for you, but to convince others to jump on the, I guess would be a electric powered train with you to the future and make these things happen.
Yeah. I'm going to borrow the electric power train.
Yeah, that just came out of nowhere. That was totally ill planned, but that was bad improv, but it worked. I think so. Yeah, I think the power of that is one that we can use to make more impact. If people can see it, then they'll maybe work toward it. Do you find that often in the work that you do with a lot of the, I'm not going to call them clients, right? They're not clients at Catapult.
Sometimes they are.
Sometimes they are. Teammates in the communities. Do you find that that's been really helpful? Just the better it's visualized, the more it's going to be sustainable?
Yes, 100%. It's a better visualization, but it's also inviting others to participate in the act of visualization, which creates ownership from communities and to our clients too, right? Despite feeling like they were included in the participation of making something, I think gives people feel like they have sort of stake in the process and in the deliverable, and more of like an initiative or a need to carry things out.
Yeah, that's that psychology, right? Where if you feel like you have some ownership of it, you're going to care more, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're coming to my last, but also my favorite question that I ask everyone. And that is, if you were asked to teach a design class, what would you assign and why would you assign that project?
So I think I would have the class do a systems mapping for social change class, where you create a map with some sort of a community-based organization, identify a challenge, and build two maps. One, an ecosystem map to understand who is in the system and who is currently being included and excluded, and all of those systems dynamics and relationship to the people. And then another would be like a systems diagramming situation where you do all the feedback loops so you understand how the flows in the system work. And I'd have them do it in or over time. So like what it currently is, what it ideally could be, and then like somewhere in the middle. So what change and process looks like. Because I think it's important to understand how to plant seeds. But sometimes when you're creating change, there's a lot of chaos that happens until the system kind of reaches equilibrium. So I think something that helps you understand the way you are, where you want to be, and then like where it is while you're getting where you want to be would be a really cool design exercise.
Let me ask you this question about, first of all, I love that project, and it's one that I have been doing with my students now and then. So we're of like minds. I really appreciate that. How do you personally, when you're thinking about these systems and either just visualizing how it is, how do you visualize them? Do you get on a big piece of paper? What do you do to do this?
Right. I'm a huge Miro person.
Miro person?
Graduating during a pandemic and having to work remotely with lots of people.
Yeah. It's not traumatic at all to go back to Miro with having to have done that through the pandemic?
Well, we're still working remotely now with a lot of people. So I'm stuck in Miro land forever, it seems. but I use Miro the most. If I'm reading and I feel like I'm seeing some kind of like loops in like secondary research, I tend to do that on paper. But things that keep coming up in research happen on Miro.
Yeah. That's a really good tool for doing that. I really like big whiteboards and getting messy, but that's just me. So that's I'm always interested to see how other people do it, because I'm always questioning, am I doing it the right way? Why isn't this working out?
Now, I really like whiteboards too. So they're good for different things. Whiteboards are good for getting everything that's in your system out and not second guessing yourself all the time, which is something that I tend to do a lot on Miro. When it's so easy to move things around before you land on something.
Yes.
That you're kind of like stuck in a circle on Miro. So
I can see that.
It's a very negative reinforcing feedback loop. But the whiteboard gets things done. Right?
Yeah, because I think in Miro you start to make things look better as you're trying to just plotted everything out.
I think that's the downfall of the designer, right? Like the aesthetics.
Yeah.
You tend to spend a lot of time on that.
That's true. Yeah. But I'm glad that you are doing what you're doing, Haleemah. It's very inspirational, and congratulations on the award, 30 under 30, all your grants that you're getting at work, and the impact that you're making in the communities. Truly appreciate you being on Climify, and it was just a great discussion today. I had a really good time speaking with Haleemah. That interview turned out pretty good. I think she is, like we said in the beginning, an impressive person, 30 under 30. This segment is dedicated to what we heard from our guest, in this case, Haleemah, and the calls to action for climate justice that we took away from the conversation. Bhavna, what was the top call to action that you felt Haleemah was telling us?
I think the most important thing is to have a small change or a small action that every single person can do, because that
Yeah.
has a effect across the system. And you never know like where it's going to snowball and actually
Yeah.
have a large.
Yeah. I think I've said this before in an episode, I believe, and that was what's the skill that you have, no matter how small it is, and how can you use that to make a difference at any level? And that was a big call to action for me, is keep on doing that. Keep on doing that, even if it's this tiny little podcast, right? It's the hope is that it'll be bigger. But another thing that I thought that I know you wanted to talk about was the planting the seeds. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I think she spoke about planting the seeds of change right now so that you can see it grow into something bigger. And I think that's really like beautifully ties it together, what she was talking about. And it like, however, like when you plant the seed, you don't necessarily know that you're even going to see that tree in your lifetime, but it is going to come up. Like you need to
Hmm.
make sure that it's matured to the way. And I think it's a very nice metaphor for how change works. And every single skill or thing, like anything that every individual has, is something that they can translate across systems.
Yeah, you and I both have an MFA, and my master's thesis exhibition. Did you do an exhibition too for your master's
I did a thesis.
thesis? Okay, I had to do both, but in the exhibition, I had this plant the seeds metaphor going on as well, and I had these little. So like this was the beginning of what became my nonprofit, Renourish, and I had these buttons, these metal buttons, and
Mm.
my logo at the time was like a burr, like you'd find in like the fields. And so the idea was you would take one of these free buttons off the wall of the gallery and you could take it home with you. So it was this idea, it had the website on it and everything, but it was this concept that I think Haleemah talked about really well, which I was hoping these would plant the seeds, right? That's how the burrs are seeds, and they're traveling along with you in this case to maybe germinate a greener idea.
Oh, yeah, of course, because you never know when you're going to get a good idea, right?
Yeah.
And it's always to carry that little bit of inspiration with you whenever you go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you never,
Carry a notebook everywhere you go. I remember in school, like my professors were like, where's your sketchbook? You never know when you're going to have a good idea. And still carry one everywhere I go today.
that's actually really fun.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things that I was really inspired about in terms of a call to action was that idea of visualizing a system. I think experiment that I want to try is, could I visualize a problem and the system that creates the problem, and find ways just by visualizing that system where to intervene? Where can I help solve the issues at hand? And I don't necessarily want to solve. I don't think I can solve at least poverty and hunger, but I think I can take a look at some of these smaller issues and find something that I could help with.
Yeah. And I think that that's actually a very good approach from what you mentioned, because when you put it to paper, you can understand the system and you can also, it helps you view systems not in isolation. It helps you understand which system interacts with what other systems. And because of that, it gives you the opportunity to pick out problems and opportunity areas that can be addressed by addressing something entirely on the other side of the system.
Hmm.
And that's something that you don't immediately get to if you don't actively sit and visualize it.
Well, you and Halima both went to SCAD, right? And I feel
Oh,
like you both understand systems really well.
oh yeah, no, I mean, I've actually seen her posters and her work displayed in the classrooms that I went to class in. I think she graduated a few years before I did.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that we do have in common over there is the importance that's given to understanding how every problem sits in the larger system. Because
Hmm.
if let's say I wanted to design something for, like, let's say sustainable packaging, right? Like, who is this? It's not just about putting out that design. It's about trying to understand, like, okay, first off, what's the problem? Who's impacted? And by me creating this, what's the economic impact or what's the impact it has on disposal? Things
Yeah.
like that, right? It could be
Yeah.
a lot of things. It really gives you the opportunity to look at it in a very broad way. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm thinking about sometimes when I got involved with thinking in systems and finding out these sometimes pretty terrible facts about existing things out there in the world and basically learning not to replicate them just by seeing how it all came together and understanding, that kind of ripple
Okay.
effect, right?
Well, yeah. And I think, yeah, I'm just really excited that people got to listen to Haleemah speaking about this because
Yeah.
it's something very valuable about translating change to everybody's day to day
Hmm.
instead of just saying, look, there's somebody doing such great things across the world and you could never do that because you're not them. Right?
Right.
It's
You're not a
it's
30 under
extremely
30 winner, so you can't do it.
yeah, it's not like that. I think
No.
that's why it's really like it's really nice that people got to listen to it speak.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the last call to action that I had was to go check out Catapult Design. They seem
Oh
to
yeah.
be pretty phenomenal, that indigenizing design effort that they're spearheading. There's a fantastic PDF that I mentioned in the interview that we're going to put in our show description. There's a lot of good stuff there. I wish I worked there sometimes.
You can check out a lot of the work that Haleemah's done with Catapult on catapultdesign.org. And over there, you can actually see a lot of their projects. And I personally found it extremely interesting when I saw their work because it covers work that spans different systems. There's stuff that's happening in healthcare, there's work that they're doing with education, gender equality. So I think there is a project that literally everybody can connect to and find something that resonates with them to try to understand where they can start making change.
Thanks, Bhavna. It's been fun unpacking this episode with you.
It's been really fun.
If you would like more knowledge about the topics discussed by our guest today, you can check out these past episodes from our Climate family. Nisha Mary Palouse, Season 3, Episode 6, and Karina von Schardenberg, Season 3, Episode 7. Thanks for listening. And we want to hear from you. What did you take away from this discussion? We also want to know how you are changing the system. Email us at climifypodcast@gmail.com or connect with us on Instagram at climifypodcast. We would love to read your inspirational stories on the show in upcoming episodes. This program is produced by Cam Birkins with writing and research by Abigail Zook, Jackie Himmel, and Bhavna Bhavani Shankar. Designed by Adam Java. Sound engineering and editing by me, Eric Benson. A special thanks to Mark O'Brien at the Climate Designers and Tink Media for their sage advice to make this season even better than the last. You can find design prompts and more information on all our guests this season at climatedesigners.org/edu/Climify and on Instagram and LinkedIn at Climify Podcast. If you enjoy the work we all do here and you have a spare minute or two, we would truly appreciate it if you left a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. The more folks reviewing our program, the higher the algorithm pushes us up in the search results. And in turn, the more likely we all could learn how to become climate designers. Next time on Climify, we'll be joined by architect Michael Reynolds. Michael Reynolds is a trailblazing architect renowned for his innovative approach to sustainable and eco-friendly building design. Born in 1945, Reynolds has dedicated his career to challenging conventional building methods, pioneering the concept of Earthship biotecture, a philosophy centered on utilizing recycled materials and passive solar design principles to create self-sufficient homes. His work embodies a harmonious blend of creativity, functionality, and environmental consciousness, earning him global recognition as a leading figure in sustainable architecture. With a commitment to empowering communities and promoting environmental stewardship, Reynolds continues to inspire architects and enthusiasts alike to rethink the way we build for a more sustainable future.
You see the things in the aisles of Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, and then you see some of the things you can do with what we throw away. Well, the real garbage is in the aisles of Home Depot.
Yeah.
That stuff is just made to fall apart. Whereas a tire or a bottle or a can wall laid in cement won't fall apart. I am constantly getting my eyes opened more and more to this. I'm scratching the surface of a whole different world, and a whole different lifestyle. And I'm not trying to cram it down people's throats or anything. I'm more or less trying to demonstrate it. And so it's been an amazing, I call it, it's a war. I've been in a war zone for 50 years, basically. It's not like research and development. It's like people are aggressively trying to make this not happen because it's garbage.